Hi, everybody. Welcome Wednesday night. I was supposed to have a baby. We are coming to a little bit late here because, life. Had to go to the bathroom, and we both were just busy doing a couple of other things. So I apologize, but we are here now. Shevi is going to come on in a minute or so. Tonight's topic is pregnancy after loss. This is something that I have been talking a lot about on the page at different points. And frankly, I don't think I've ever done a live specifically on pregnancy after loss, even though we've discussed it many different points. There's a highlight about pregnancy after loss on the page already. But Shevi has been opening up about her experiences with loss, and she really wanted to, here she is, she really wanted to have this further discussion. She started off the discussion about miscarriage, about loss with Elisheva. Hello, Shevi.
Hi, I'm just trying to hook you up.
Yeah.
Techie.
Do anything you need. So Shevi started this conversation with Elisheva, and just to kind of mix things up, she said, "Hey, you want to do this?" And I was like, "Hey, why not?" Here we are.
Right. And actually, I think, Amy, the last time we did a live was right after I had a baby. Do you remember that?
All I remember is that I was in my car.
Yeah.
I normally don't do lives from my car.
Yeah.
And it was about NIDA, and about a lot of people were having really difficult, they were just really struggling with different aspects of NIDA. And NIDA, what I mean by NIDA, for everyone who, just to explain more, NIDA are the family purity laws in Judaism that, you're still shaking a little bit, Shevi. I'm just letting you know.
I'm trying to hook you up to my, to my tripod. I'm trying to be fancy, so I have my hands because I'm a hand talker.
All right, it's all good. It's all good. Wait, I'll just keep talking in the meantime. Anyway, the last live we did was about the different laws of family purity, and how those laws really were they were causing a lot of difficulty, and a lot of people who are dealing with infertility and loss were really struggling with those laws and sort of how to relate to that. And Shevi, being a college teacher, is someone who teaches these laws to lots of different people, and specifically women who are about to get married and sort of embark on the journey of keeping these laws. Wow, fancy.
I have a ring light.
Fancy.
I'm a real Instagrammer now.
You totally are. It's funny because I have one.
No, wow. Okay.
No. You're good. It's funny. I have one, but I don't use it when I'm wearing my glasses, because then it gives that weird reflection and
weird glare. Yeah, I have to remember to charge it. I'm very proud of myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yay.
I feel very happy right now.
Yeah. All good. So that. So just to sort of complete that thought, that live is up on YouTube. It's on the I Was Supposed to Have a Baby channel, and you can find that through the website. You can go to the resources tab, and then that'll take you to the video library, and you can search for Shevi, and it's there. But today we're not doing that. We are. Okay, hold on. I don't know what we're doing, actually. We're just kind of...
we're experiencing not technical difficulties for a change, but just... I let my kids use my tripod. Guess if that was a good idea. Okay. Hopefully this
All right,
now.
so as you get settled here, today we're going to talk about pregnancy after loss. And this is, it's something that I discuss on the page from a quote, professional level, but it's also a deeply personal topic for me, having had 6 miscarriages. And I know it's a deeply personal topic for you as well, Shevi. And, look, we're always open to questions, but I think this is really not to give, none of this is really meant to give any of you the answers. This is more, we view this as a way to validate all of the feelings that you're feeling.
Yeah. And I think I said this, I don't know if it was to you, or I feel like I said this to a few people in the last few days. Like, sometimes I feel like you can't have these conversations enough. Like, there are times where I'm like, oh, should we do that live? I feel like they already did a live like that. I feel like there already was a conversation like that. I feel like they're already done. But you kind of can't really do it enough, because there's always going to be someone who connects to something that you say at a certain period in time, and it's different, you know.
Absolutely.
And so sometimes it's not about like what you hear, but kind of who you hear it from and in what context. That just like that gives you a different kind of support experience. So I think that that's, you know, what we're trying to do. And you know, it's when I first um like opened up about pregnancy loss on my page, sounds like a funny thing, like opened up, you know, like I opened up and then I slammed it shut.
Yes,
Which
because
is
you're
totally
allowed.
fine. I'm allowed to do that. I'm
Yes,
allowed.
you are.
But it's like, it's not what my page was ever about. And it's not something that I ever really intended to use a platform like Instagram for. But you know, I found myself in this experience. And as I mentioned in the live with Elisheva, you know, my most recent loss was also my latest. So in that sense, a lot of people knew that I was pregnant, whereas with previous losses, people didn't know that I was pregnant. So I didn't need to disclose the loss. I didn't have to explain anything. I felt like I had that, you know, that privacy. And
Meaning
then
that
once
it was you were pregnant the longest with that pregnancy that
Right,
it was
exactly.
okay.
Yeah. So it was, you know, and as much as like, okay, you never should ask anybody if they're pregnant. I feel like we need to say that in every single live. Like, it
A,
cannot be
a
overstated.
thousand
Never.
times. A
Exactly. Cannot
thousand
be overstated.
times. Yeah.
But it was more public in that sense. And I think this is something that I actually only realized when I said it in the last live. I think sharing on Instagram about that loss was sort of my way of like regaining, I'm slipping. See, this isn't working. Was my way of regaining control of the narrative, because it felt like that had been like taken away from me. Like, wait, I've always been able to keep this private. Now I can't keep it private. Well, if I can't keep it private, I'm going to go public my way. You know, like
Yep.
that was sort of my rebellion almost.
Yep.
And the feedback was so overwhelming. I'm sure you're familiar with this, that people are just so grateful to anybody who's willing to talk at all, ever.
Correct.
Because it feels like the more people talk, the more that people can speak for me in a way, right? The more voices there are, the more likely it is that there's a voice that represents mine. And then almost exactly a year later, I had a baby last year. She just turned 1, almost, her English birthday is almost. And you know, so I posted that, and like I didn't even post her, I posted her feet.
It
But
was such a
feet are
delicious picture. Such a delicious
baby
picture.
feet, you know? And I sort of just felt like I was going back and forth during that pregnancy. Like, do I share? Do I not? I didn't share that I was pregnant. Some people had seen me in person, so they knew, but it was not something that I announced on here. And I, you know, I sort of went back and forth, like, do I say that I had a baby? Do I not say that I had a baby? And after I did say, like, you know, Baruch Hashem, I had a baby, I was so grateful that I did, because so many people said, like, I've been thinking about you. And then also, like, can you talk about that experience, having a baby after a miscarriage? Now, she wasn't the first baby that I had after a miscarriage. Baruch Hashem, I've had a few. Well, not Baruch Hashem, I had a few miscarriages, or maybe I had a few miscarriages. So I've had a few babies post miscarriage, post loss. But you know, again, because this was kind of public and people were asking me, and I was like, sure, yeah, definitely. Like, I think that's a really important conversation. Like, we should have that conversation. And then I didn't, and I couldn't, and I couldn't, and I didn't, you know, and all that. And then COVID.
Right.
And that's
Right.
kind of, I'm going to move this because, so that's kind of where we are now in having that conversation. So, I'll just share like a tiny bit about my own personal experience. So I actually remember, you know, a few months after this, like this past loss, I, you know, and again, like the, you know, the details don't matter and the medical history doesn't really matter for this
Yep.
conversation, but it was necessary for me to kind of, you know, undergo some testing to kind of follow up. And then I remember exactly where I was. I was picking up my son from playgroup, and I was a little bit early, and I was sitting in the parking lot, and I got a call from my OBGYN, and she said, okay, all of your results came back, and she gave me the results. And I remember saying to her, like, so what do I do now? You know, and I was still like in those shock, like few months afterwards, like I'm
Right.
still supposed to be pregnant. I'm like,
Yep.
so what do I do now? And she goes, get pregnant. And I was like, and it sort of like hit me because I was like, yeah, can I do
Right.
that? Like even like emotionally at that point, like it's just that easy. You just
Right.
do that, you know. You
Right.
just like you
Right.
like carry on, you move on. And that was kind of hard for me. That was like hard for me to even like acknowledge, even be able to assess my own readiness. And I remember having that conversation with, you know, with my husband, and with the other people that I trust, like, how do I assess this? Like, she's telling me from a medical perspective, you're clear. But
Yep.
like, what about everything else that
Yep.
I need to take into consideration? So I just want to acknowledge that just because you have, you know, a medical clearance, um, doesn't necessarily mean that you're ready. And
That
I
was
think
that.
you really need to take the time, you know, or not. It's totally up to you. Some people say like, oh, if I take the time to process it, I'll never be ready. I have to just sort of jump in and deal with the consequences afterwards. And I have to acknowledge that that's also valid. You know, like that's one way of
Definitely.
handling things. But I remember being surprised that I wasn't more relieved, you know, with her saying
Look,
that. Like,
yeah, yeah. Look, I mean, I could give you my own personal story. Well, I think I'll do
mm-hmm,
that a little bit later. But just in terms of, you know, the dozens and dozens and dozens, whatever that number is, of women that I've worked
yeah,
with, the the reaction to that exact point of, yes, I'm cleared medically, but now what? Like, and some
mm-hmm,
people are like, the only thing that's going to make me feel whole emotionally is if I get pregnant again quickly. And so I need to get
right,
pregnant again quickly to feel that hole, to fill that hole. And so if I get
yeah,
pregnant quickly, then I won't lose time. And then
yes,
I'll just like,
yeah,
it'll feel better and it's easier,
yeah,
especially if it's an early loss, like, because then you
yeah.
like, you don't lose that much time. And
Yeah,
so you
and
just,
I feel like there's this like this need to like catch up to where you were, right? Like, oh, I
yes,
wasted all
yes,
this time being pregnant for nothing. I thought I'm having a baby this season, you know, and sometimes like you can sort of
right,
plot it out like, okay, I thought I could have a baby at the beginning of this season, but if I hurry up, I can have a baby
correct.
by the end of this season.
Correct. And I won't have lost that
It
much
won't be
time. So
winter,
therefore,
you know?
correct, correct. So therefore, like, I need to try to get pregnant quickly. And
Yeah,
but sometimes even with early losses, and again, like, it doesn't matter whether it's an early loss or a later
yeah,
loss, and you
yeah,
can't generalize in that way.
yeah,
But I've dealt with so many families that
yeah,
even with those early losses, they just they need a moment. And
yeah.
that moment sometimes it's a very long time. It's months and months and
Mm-hmm.
months. Maybe it's even years.
Yeah,
And it's just processing and making sure that they're emotionally whole enough to be
yeah,
able to go through another pregnancy,
yeah,
because it's not about like, what's the ichor, what's the essence of pregnancy after loss? The real essence of it is anxiety. Like,
mm-hmm.
it's an entire 9 months of anxiety.
You're
So
just
the
holding your
real
breath
you're
for
holding
nine
your
months.
breath the whole time.
Yeah,
And so the
yeah,
real question becomes,
yeah,
are you emotionally, mentally, have you been fortified enough
yeah,
to be able to take that on again? Like,
yeah,
again, or just take the pregnancy on again, and knowing that that's what's coming. Because even though you may be totally fine and say like, okay, it's fine, it happens, you're like, it was an early loss or whatever it is, you rationalize it away. The reality is, the next time you see those two pink lines, you're immediately going to start to spin. And
yeah.
so now I'll just sort of give you like a quick like medical history. Like,
Mm-hmm.
doctors, OBGYNs, really, what, like, in the quote olden days,
Yeah,
everyone was told if you had a loss, even if it was an early loss, you had to wait 2 months, 3 months. Sometimes people said 6 months. Like, those were the
right,
recommendations that came
right.
down from the American College of OBGYN. Why? not because physically a woman was not capable of carrying a pregnancy again, generally speaking, right? Like every situation is different. Like I'm not, this is not specific to your situation,
Right.
but
Right.
those recommendations were, don't get pregnant right away. Like take your time. And the reason was, it was, if God forbid you lose another pregnancy, we want to make sure that you're not going to fall apart. And so take the time to wait. Now, the recommendations have shifted and changed, not because anything different has been, there's nothing different that's gone on in the female body after, miscarriage now in 2020 or whatever. But the recommendations now are, like have a period, make sure that your body is working normally again, have a period, and then go try. But you also have to carry the knowledge with you that you need to make sure that you're okay with that pregnancy.
Yeah. And it's hard because you're trying to prepare yourself sometimes for a reality that you don't really have experience with. So you're not 100% sure what it's going to take to be able to handle a subsequent pregnancy. So you're trying to gather all of your resources, and you don't know how much of them you're going to have to use.
Right. That's exactly it.
So it can be really tricky because it's like, make sure you're okay. And you're like, well, how do I know? How do I know that I'm okay? How do I know that I can do that? And it's very possible that you won't.
Right.
You won't, and there's a certain amount of total readiness that you might not get to, which makes sense because there is very often this lingering nervousness in all of it. And can you just will that away? Can you heal that away? I don't think you can. I think that you can kind of learn the tools and the skills to get you through it. I think you can learn how to cope. I think you can, develop some emotional stamina, but I don't think you can get to a point where, okay, I want to get to the point where I can be pregnant without being nervous. I don't think that's a realistic goal.
Yes. You're 1,000% right. And also let's also not forget that there's still grief here. The grief overlays the anxiety. Okay, for some people, they're not grieving their pregnancy. They're really fine. And that's okay. But a lot of the times it's grief that's overlaying that anxiety. And so when you have sort of one on top of the other, it just makes for a very, very, very scary and just very nerve-wracking situation. Fix, Shevi, fix.
I'm working on it, but I'm listening to you while I do this.
What I mean by that is take your time. Not go do it now. Just take your time. I don't want to. It's terrible to have to hold a phone for the whole life. So
my weight training for the day. I think I fixed it.
Yeah.
But in case anyone's wondering, the Samet children will not be using their mother's tripod anymore.
Look, I think what you were saying is exactly right. It really is I also don't think that you can ever get to a place where you go into another pregnancy and you're totally cool, calm, and collected and have this naive, everything's going to be fine. It's going to be a beautiful 9 months. Unfortunately, that's gone. The innocence is gone. And you just have to sort of call it what it is. It's just gone. I think that for some people, and also say for me, my first loss was 2.5, 3 years into my marriage. I had a daughter. We had our first daughter was born within the first year. And then a few years later, as we were trying again, and that was our period of secondary infertility, we did Clomid and IUI, that first cycle, and I got pregnant. And it was it worked. That was so simple. It worked, and everything is good, and da-da-da. And, I go in for the 6-week appointment, my numbers are climbing, and I go in for the 6-week appointment, and we see the fetal pole, and all is good, and blah, blah, blah. And, the doctor's joking with me as I go in for the 8-week appointment, and he gets me on the table. And remember, I can read the ultrasounds, and there's no heartbeat. And I forget about the fact that I thought, I got this, It's all good. Like,
Yeah.
you know, we figured it out. Like, this was the magic formula, blah, blah, blah. Like, putting all of the grief aside, it just, that pregnancy colored all of the other pregnancies that I had because I couldn't settle at all until I got past the 8-week appointment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
I'll just sort of give like the next snippet and then we'll go back.
Yeah.
Like once, and then for me, I think the most painful and difficult part of my subsequent losses, like after my third, I had 4 second trimester losses in a row that were all at 16 or 17 weeks. And the doctors already told me, like, if you have a heartbeat, everything's going to be fine. So I had already made it past that 8-week appointment and everything was fine. So it never occurred to me, I'm a doctor, but it never occurred to me that you could just walk into an appointment one day and have no heartbeat. So I think for every person, like they sort of have those lines in the sand of like, if I make it past, then, if I make it past, then. Obviously, if you have a stillbirth, a full-term stillbirth, it's a totally different story.
Totally different, yeah.
But for many people, it's like, if I make it past, then.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And there are times where I'll reflect, and I'm so grateful that I had a first pregnancy that was just like innocent and blissful.
Yeah, me too.
It was just
me
so
too.
like, I didn't give anything a second thought. I was just like, of course I'm pregnant. Of course everything's progressing normally. Of course there's a heartbeat. Of course I'm enormous. Of course, you know? And I'm so grateful that I have that experience somewhere in my story.
Right.
Just because, you know, there's so many subsequent experiences that aren't that. Like, I know this isn't what we're talking about, but I also have IUGR complications, which basically means like growth restriction. Now, it's always funny when people say that, because I always say, like, saying IUGR is saying like I have a headache. Like, it's a symptom. It's not really a diagnosis, you know?
Right,
People are like,
right.
oh, my baby's got IUGR, and I'm like, but why?
Yeah, but why?
So
it's always the but why. Yes.
So it's a little bit more complicated than that, but like there were definitely times where people were like, wow, you're so tiny. You know, again, like, not a thing to say to people. And I'm like, no. I know it's because my baby is like only 3 pounds when it's supposed to be 7. So that'll do it to you, you know? But I remember that feeling of like, oh, I'm so happy that like with my first one, I was huge. Cause like, I know that like I once did that. And there is something reassuring about that, you know? So, and then there's also always, you know, so yes, there's that anxiety, but then there's always like, well, maybe this time, like, I'll somehow get away with it. Like, I'll somehow like escape the, and yeah, I would definitely remember feeling like, you know, with this like most recent loss, which is somehow the one that ends up getting like talked about the most. Like, there were others, but somehow this is the one that was shared on Instagram. So this is the one that gets airtime. I remember very much having that feeling of like, okay, but this is like the late, I've never had a miscarriage this late. Like, all of my miscarriages were like before 14 weeks. So like, it's not going to happen, because I knew what, you know, contributed to those losses. So I knew that if I got to this point, then that wasn't going to be the reason that I experienced a loss. So I'm in the clear. And there was this feeling of like, yes, it's in the bag.
Yep.
It's never in the bag. That's not how it works. Never. So, you know, there's definitely that shock. So like you said it best, really, that like anxiety is really what ends up coloring the entire experience for you. You know,
how? Okay, Shevi.
So
how? So I mean, I'll give you my thoughts, but I want to hear your thoughts first. So tell us, how did you get through those pregnancies? Like, how did you deal with the anxiety?
Okay, so the first thing that I'll say is, how are we defining get through? I'm still alive to tell the tale.
Okay, yeah.
You know, so I think that that's one thing that we have to sort of like redefine. How are we redefining like handling, managing, getting through? I think you kind of have to lower the bar for yourself a little bit. I think you need to recognize a lot. I'm not so good at that for myself, but for everyone else, you should all lower the bar a lot. And I think you have to acknowledge how much emotional um, stamina is going to be like required of you, and how exhausting that is on top of the just general exhaustion of pregnancy, and you really conserve energy. So I know for me, I mean, I didn't even have COVID to blame, but like I didn't go a lot of places.
Yep.
I really conserved a lot of my energy, a lot of my just like emotional reserve just went to, you know, just getting through the day, getting to the next doctor's appointment, being there for my family, you know, my children who are old enough to know what had happened previously, being there for them, you know, trying to reassure them, but also like not reassure them too much because like I don't want them to be too disappointed, but like also I want them to be hopeful, but also, you know, just sort of like trying to temper that. So I insulted a lot of people.
Yes.
I didn't go to your
Hi.
wedding or your bar
Hi.
mitzvah or
Hi.
your
Oh,
nishay or your
yeah.
anything. I just didn't. I just didn't go. And that was like to in a certain way unusual for me because I'm kind of the type of person who does show up, but also that was what I needed. That was what it took. Somebody else might feel like the total opposite, like they need those distractions, they need to get out, they need to keep everything as normal as possible. So, you know, just be honest with yourself and kind of ask for what you need from the people around you, and just don't worry about, you know, I remember I kept telling myself like, oh, I'm not answering her call, or oh, you know, she keeps asking to get together, and I keep saying no, like it's only 9 months and afterwards I'll explain.
Yep.
You know, like
Totally.
that was kind of like
Totally.
it's not that long, you know what I'm saying? We'll
Totally.
just get through it, and afterwards, like better to ask, you know, for forgiveness and permission. So I was like, I'll just
Totally.
ask for forgiveness for everybody afterwards. Um,
Totally.
and I did really find, by the way, that people were quite understanding. Interestingly, people were more understanding the less information I offered. This was a really interesting like discovery for me. At first I felt like, oh, I have to like explain myself so that people, you know, will understand, will really understand. But the problem when you start explaining yourself is that people will sort of come to you with their similar experiences and how they navigated it differently. And like the more you explain, the more you almost leave room for them to counter your explanation. But if you're just like, I know you really like, you really want me to be, I so appreciate that you want me there, or I so appreciate that you're I can't right now, and
Can't. Yep.
I really appreciate you respecting that, and like
Period.
not offering details. Like that's
Yep.
it. People were like, I get it, I totally get it. And whether they did or they didn't is irrelevant, but it definitely made it easier for me not to offer, you know, not to offer too much. I also, you know, we talked about this, I do want to kind of put out there that while some people will, you know, choose to pursue another pregnancy immediately, other people will, you know, choose to give it some time. Not everybody has that option. And also not everybody is going to make that choice. Some people might say, I can't do this again.
Yep.
I can't do
Yep.
this again. I'm at capacity. And sometimes people are, you know, told by their doctor, this is it.
Yep.
You
Yep.
reached your
Enough.
limit for whatever reason.
Yep.
You know, so like, you know, medically your body can't handle this or whatever it might be. So I think that even this whole conversation, pregnancy after loss, is in and of itself a luxury, you know, to be able to even have this conversation. And I think that like it's important for me to acknowledge that I recognize that not everybody has that luxury.
A
And I think
thousand,
that,
1,000%.
yeah. And I think there can be a certain amount of, okay, you know, I know that this pregnancy won't replace the loss, but it will sort of like, there'll be a hole, there's like a void, and then there's something that fills the void, and maybe it won't be like a perfect fit, but I'll feel fuller. And I think that sometimes, you know, I had this conversation with a friend of mine who had that experience of not being able to pursue a pregnancy after her loss. And she was really holding it. She's like, but if I would be able to, I know I would feel better. And obviously I'm not going to go to her and say like, you might not though. I'm not going
Correct.
to say
Correct.
that.
Because that,
I'm
right.
not
You
going to
can't.
say
Right.
that,
Right.
you know, because she's allowed to feel hopeful in that way, or she's allowed to feel like, you know, pining in that way. But I think like that's kind of what we're trying to do with this conversation, just put all of these things out there, you know.
Definitely. And so I want to, a couple of the things that you said just sparked a few things in my memory. I think that this concept of pregnancy after loss
Yeah.
especially in the Jewish community, and how much more
Yeah.
so in the religious community, I think is a very interesting topic, because we as a community value family. We,
Yeah.
and in specific, segments of our community, we value large families. And
Yeah.
so the luxury, and I'm using the word luxury very loosely here, obviously,
Yeah.
the luxury of saying, no, I can't do this anymore,
Yeah.
often is not allowed. Like, what people don't allow themselves to say no because of communal pressures, because of familial pressures, whatever
Yeah.
those are. But I think our community sort of puts a lot of this on us, whether we're ready to emotionally try again or not. And I'll
Yeah.
just, I remember so clearly, like it was yesterday, this conversation with my high-risk OBGYN who was taking care of me during my third and fourth losses at that point. She's the head of MFM, maternal fetal medicine at Columbia. Her name is Mary Dalton. She said to me,
I'm also a Columbia gal. We can
she's
smooth about that later.
exactly. So she said to me, at the time, she said, it's only you religious women who do this to yourselves. She said, I don't have any other patients that go after pregnancy in the same
Yeah.
way you do, especially when you've been traumatized
Yeah.
so frequently. She
Yeah.
said, it's you, quote, religious way. And she said that in
Yeah.
the nicest, kindest way. She said, like,
Totally.
I'm here, like she kept saying to me, like, I'm here to support you. Whatever you want to do, if you want to try again, I'm here to support you. But I don't know how much more I can give you. Like, there is literally nothing medically that I can
Yeah.
tell you that will be different the next pregnancy. But
Right.
you can try again and I will support you. So like
Yeah.
I remember that conversation like it was yesterday. I also
Totally.
remember my regular OB who, like, I would go to him after each of these losses, in between these losses, because he was doing my post checkups and blah, blah, blah in the meantime. And he at one point, I think it was either after the third or the fourth loss, he said to me, he said, Amy, he said, you can't do this anymore. And I said, why not? He said, because I can't watch you go through this anymore.
Yeah.
I can't do this with you. He said, I'll be here to support you, but it's too painful for me to
Yeah.
watch you do this.
Yeah.
And I think that we as a community, we do this because we want large families.
Yeah.
And and we sort of put aside our emotional uneasiness because that need is driving us. And so I
Yeah.
just want to also acknowledge, as you were saying, like, you don't have to say yes. Like, you can say no. You can take breaks. I took many breaks.
Mm-hmm.
You can get to a place where you're just not willing to do it anymore. And again, like, I'm not here to give you rabbinic, I'm not here to paskin for you. I'm not here to
Yeah.
tell you what you can and can't do. Like, these are all questions you need to ask your own rabbi if that's
Yeah.
something that's important to you. But
Yeah.
emotional health is extremely important. And if
Yeah.
you're pursuing this pregnancy, this next pregnancy, to the detriment of your own emotional health, not able to give to your family, to your husband, that are there with you right at that moment, then that's something that you should reconsider.
Yeah. I remember after that loss, I think it was like the following week, I had a meeting with a big New York area rabbi, like community leader, about something totally different, something professional. And these meetings aren't so easy to get, so I just kept it. Like, of course, I'm going.
Of
Um,
course.
of course. And I actually was meeting two other people there, and they were running late, and they were like, "We're gonna be half an hour late," and I was like, "You can't be half an hour late. We only have an hour with this like rush yeshiva, and also like, what am I supposed to do with him for half an hour?" They were like, "I don't know, stall him. Maybe you have your own personal questions to ask." And I was like, "Okay, maybe." So I like sitting here with them, like, they're just running a few minutes late. If I could like ask the Rosh Yeshiva like my own personal, my own personal questions. And he was like, okay, sure. And I asked him a bunch of like, teaching questions and professional things. And then I was like, and so last week I had a miscarriage, and I just like, okay. So it's like me and the Rosh Hashiva. I wonder actually if Mimi is still on here, if she remembers that day. I saw her just before this, and I was like, I'm going to meet this Rosh Hashiva, and she was like, Shevi, what is wrong with you? And I'm like, sobbing and sobbing, and he looks over at me. This is actually a rabbi who himself, I didn't know this until he told me, had had some fertility challenges himself with him and his then he's much older, his wife who's no longer alive. And he actually gave me some very good practical advice. But I remember he looked over at me and he goes, pru urvu, which is the rabbinic commandment to be fruitful and multiply. He says, pru urvu, who told you that that's quantity and not quality? And I remember it was just like such a reassuring thing for me to hear. And then he goes, and you don't only have to have them, you have to raise them. And it was like, if you're going to be a mess because you're pursuing quantity at the expense of quality, you might want to reconsider whether you're actually fulfilling the commandment that you're so, set on fulfilling. Like, is that actually the right thing to do? So that was a hugely reassuring conversation. Like, I'm so happy that those people were late.
Look, and that's what a good rabbi does, right? At the end of the day, like, a good rabbi takes the risk-benefit analysis of your life and hears your concerns and your needs and your everything, and then helps you to bring you to a decision. Like that's what a good rabbi does. And so, like, this pursuing pregnancy, like, to the ends of the earth because of this, like, communal pressure, religious pressure, whatever it is just, it doesn't have to be a value. And I think what he said is brilliant, is really brilliant.
Yeah. And it was like exactly what I needed to hear. And I think I actually shared it with a friend of mine who has her own, journey with infertility. And I know she has a connection with this rabbi, and I told her what he said to me, and she said, he told me the exact same thing.
Amazing.
He told me the exact same thing. She was really struggling with having a smaller family than she originally wanted, anticipated. He told me the exact same thing. And I'm like, oh, at least he's consistent.
Totally.
So
So I also want to, like, we also talked about, like, this dissociative trauma with the pregnancy and the baby and dealing with all of that. So you, me, go, you go, I go. Go.
I think in general, from when I experienced my first loss, which was between my first and second children, I definitely absorbed a certain amount of this, like, having a harder time connecting to a pregnancy during pregnancy. So my children, once they were born, it almost felt like that's when I started connecting. And I guess this is also I'm going back, like 12, 13 years. And so we didn't have Instagram, but like blogs were much bigger then, but like you had to actually go to the blog, like not to the Instagram page of the blog, but like the actual blog. And I would and I was living in Israel at the time, and I was young, and I had friends and I had support, but this wasn't the kind of thing that we like talked openly about. And I remember I was reading on all of these different like pregnancy blogs. I was pregnant with my second, and people were talking about like how they were connecting with their babies. And I remember having this feeling of like, am I doing pregnancy wrong? I don't have that. I don't feel that way.
Yep.
I'm not like, I actually remember I went to this prenatal yoga, and the yoga, I really did it for like totally like the physical, it's supposed to be really good for your pelvic floor, and it was really good like stretching and whatever. And at the end of every prenatal, and I went with my neighbor who was pregnant at the same time, and it was so much fun. And at the end of every session, she would do this, like, I don't even know what it was, like a deep meditative something or other, but she would like position us on this mat, everybody on their mat, and we would like get really comfortable, and she would like lead us through this guided meditation. I remember it was like, go deep into your body, and like like into your uterus, say hello to your baby, like that
Wow.
kind of a thing. And I remember
Wow.
she would always be like, Chevy, take a nap. everyone else go into your uterus, you know? And I was like, Chevy's checking out. She's not saying hello to her baby. She's falling asleep for 20 minutes. And everybody else is like, wow. And I was like, not. It was not happening. It was a great nap. Best sleep I had. 20 minutes a week. It was this like, you know, best nap ever. But I just couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. And for a while I felt bad about that. But that, you know, I think we caught up.
Shavasana. Yeah.
Exactly. We caught up. I made up for it later. It's okay. It makes sense. It took me a while to recognize that that was a result of, you know, the experience of loss, like the inability to really deeply connect to something that you fear losing at any given moment. You know, so that it took years till I made that connection. But at the time I was like, okay, this is just how I do it. I'm not like, you know, so meditative, whatever.
Touchy
Yoga's not my
feely
thing.
and blah,
Yeah,
blah, blah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But it definitely initially like induced some guilt in me because everybody else is talking about like, I don't know, just how deeply connected they feel to this, you know, life growing inside of them. And I'm like, I'll connect when it's outside of me. When I can actually
Oh,
see
yeah.
it and it's breathing and I'm holding it and we're
Oh,
past that, then we'll connect, you know, because to invest myself too much beforehand was just, I couldn't do it.
yep.
You know, I couldn't do it.
Exactly. So I had exactly the same experience with my losses. So, you know, the first loss, I thought it was a good pregnancy. So, you know, I was connected.
Right.
The second loss, I'm talking about the four in a row that I had. The
Yeah.
second loss, you know, everybody told me it was a fluke. The first one is a fluke. So I was like, okay, well, this one's going to be fine. So still
Right.
connected. By the third, I never looked at the ultrasound screens.
Yeah.
I didn't take pictures of the ultrasound. I was completely checked out. By the
Yeah.
fourth, exactly the same. And then
Yeah.
in our last pregnancy, which were our twins,
Yeah.
I do not have a single memento from that pregnancy. I was convinced, literally, even up until the day that they were delivered,
Yeah.
I had a C-section because they were both breech. So I knew exactly when I was getting delivered. I knew
Yeah.
at the 36-week mark, they were coming out. I had other medical complications that I knew I had to deliver early.
Right.
And literally until, I mean, I'm going to be graphic, until I was cut open, I was convinced those babies would also die.
Yeah.
And I could not connect with them at all, period. And I also, like, I reflect back now that even during the first number of months that they were alive, like, I was very overwhelmed. I had two new babies. I had three
Yeah.
other children at home. Like,
Yeah.
it was like a crazy, we also, like, we were moving. Like, it was like a crazy time. Like, I only
Yeah.
do moves right after babies. Like, that's what I do.
Great
Um,
timing.
yeah, it's very important to do it like that. But I, upon reflection, and I've thought back about this many times, like, I couldn't, I really did not connect with my twins until they were a number of months old. Like, I just couldn't, like, I was in such a state of denial of, like, I can't believe they're actually here. How come they're not dead? And, like, I'm just saying that, like, bluntly, because
Yeah, no, because
like,
that's how it feels. That's the
that's
experience.
exactly how it felt. Exactly how it felt.
Yeah. Yeah. I definitely remember feeling like, I remember going into a baby store because they were having like a layette sale. And I was like, you know, almost due. And I was like, okay, I guess I should, you know, probably have a stretchy for this baby. Because, like, you know, and I remember getting to the cash with like you know, a few stretchies. And she says, oh, these sale items are not returnable, like they're final sale. And I remember being like, I can't buy anything that's final sale. And I literally had a baby the next week, you know, but I was
Right.
like, I can't buy anything that's final sale. Like, if I guess I have to be able to return it just in case.
Yep.
I have to be able to return it, you
Yep.
know? And
Yep.
literally up until that moment. And yeah, it definitely, it can definitely linger, like you said, you know, for a few months afterwards, because, you know, I always think about, Emily Nagoski talks about this in her book Burnout. I don't know if you've read it, but you
I
should.
don't. I
Okay.
don't.
Oh, we're gonna have to talk about that.
Okay.
But she talks about how just because the stressor is gone doesn't mean that the stress has been resolved. That like
Yes.
you just because what's inducing this anxiety is not really not a reality that you have to contend with anymore doesn't mean that all of the emotions that have gone along with them have been processed and resolved, right?
Yeah.
Like, so
Yes.
it's like, the lion that's attacking you, maybe the lion it disappears, but your heart is still beating, right? You still have to
Correct.
resolve that, like, that experience. You still have to resolve that,
Correct.
complete that stress cycle. And I think that's a lot of
Yes.
it. Yeah,
Yes, I
yeah,
think that there was another point. Like I'll just give you another example of like how dissociated I was. Like as much so I also during especially during that last pregnancy, my twin pregnancy, I also like basically didn't leave the house.
yeah,
Um, we never actually told our other children that I was pregnant. It was
yeah,
only when they noticed that my stomach was getting bigger and
yeah,
they asked, that was when we told them, because I couldn't handle giving them
yeah,
news. I
yeah,
couldn't. And then like, over those months, like I remember like we have very, very dear friends who are neighbors of ours, and
mm-hmm.
they came over for a Shabbos meal, and her parents were there. Were there for Shabbos also, so they all came over for a Shabbos meal.
Remember those
And
days?
yeah, do you see me like? And so her mother, who I'm very close with them and very close with her parents. We had many conversations, and her mother like turns to me at one point and says, "So when do you do?" And I said, "When the baby's ready to come." Because number one, we didn't tell anyone we were having twins, even my parents. But that
Yeah.
some people do anyway with
Right,
twin
right,
pregnancies.
right.
But I literally couldn't even
Yeah.
attach myself to a due date
Mm-hmm.
because I was so dissociated from this pregnancy.
Totally.
Like I couldn't even like put it on the calendar, think like I couldn't tell people because it was like, how do I know these
Yeah.
babies are going to make it to a due date? Like
Yeah, I think that's so normal. I couldn't tell people, and I remember being at the Hanukkah Nishay in my neighborhood. So my baby was born Dalit Teves. Okay, so it's literally the day after Hanukkah. So I'm there like the week before, and somebody like made a pregnancy related comment, and I was like, huh? Just like play. I wasn't even trying to be rude, but she was like asking me something like, "Oh, like, do you have to go back to work right away?" And I was like, "What are you talking about?" I think that I really didn't even like make the connection. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm ignoring this. Why aren't you ignoring all this?
right,
you
right,
know?
right,
Yeah.
right, right.
Yeah.
I think also, I mean, the discussion about like going back a little bit to the like how do you cope, how do you deal with like your emotions, how do you deal with your husband's emotions, like all of those
Yeah.
pieces are also like really huge. um
Yeah.
I'll just speak for myself. Like
Mm-hmm.
I like, so again, like we already know I wasn't going anywhere. We already know I wasn't telling anybody due dates. We already
Right.
like all of those things we
Mm-hmm.
already know. But I also like my husband always like gave me the choice
Yes.
to decide when and if I was ready. There,
Yeah.
there was no pushing. There was no like ready to get pregnant again if I was ready.
Mm-hmm.
Like there was no pushing. There was no anything. But it was we did have these conversations about like, well, okay, now that we are pregnant, like, what do we tell people? Do we tell people? I want to tell people. Well, you don't
Yeah.
want to tell people. How do I tell
Yeah.
people? I'm like, there were
I
so
remember
many of those
actually
kinds of
saying,
conversations.
like, my husband was like, I want to tell my siblings. I'm like, as long as they don't say anything to me. As
Yeah,
long as they pretend, as long as if I call your sister for a recipe for brownies, she's not going to ask me how I'm feeling. You can tell
yes,
her. But she needs to play
yes,
along
exactly.
with my playing dumb, and we are not
Yes,
discuss. And he was like, okay. So I'm like, so anybody that you tell, you need to also tell that they are not allowed to mention it to me. He's like, they're not allowed to mention your pregnancy to you. Correct.
Exactly. Exactly.
Those are the
Exactly.
conditions. These are my terms. Take
Right.
it or leave it.
Right. Because the reality is like,
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't have those conversations. Like, I
Right.
just, I
Right.
wasn't
Yeah.
interested in having those
But at the same time,
conversations.
I really respected that. Of course, he wanted to share with his family, and he needs his own support, and and he
Yeah.
needs to, find his own way to connect to this hopefully baby joining our family. So for me, that was a way of kind of like navigating it. Like, yes, you can tell the people that you need to tell. Um, they just can't ever tell me that they know.
Yeah. Yeah. Look, I mean, I
That felt
think,
fair to me.
yeah, correct. I think it's totally fair. And also, I'll just say, like, I mean, some of the greatest conversations I had, because again, like, we didn't tell anyone about the pregnancy.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
we ended up having some conversations with family that lived far away, like towards
Mm-hmm.
the end. But some of the greatest conversations we had were the conversations after the twins were born in the hospital. Like when we called
Yeah.
our dear friend, who's also our caterer, who we
Yeah.
hadn't seen in 9 months because, I didn't go anywhere,
Right.
or 8 months because they were born at 36 weeks.
Right.
And the conversation was, Shlomo, um, would you like to do a RIS in 7 days? And he was like, what are you talking about?
What are you talking?
What?
Who's Brett?
What?
Who?
Like,
Who?
I'm like, the scream, like the
Yeah.
scream, like
Yeah.
it just, like, I
Yeah.
still remember, like, it was the most delicious and wonderful feeling having
Yeah.
those conversations with people, because all of those people were praying and hoping and like had no idea.
Yeah.
And it was just like,
Yeah.
it was some of these moments I really treasure. But I think the point here that you and I are trying to share is that this is what you and I needed to do to
Right.
survive those pregnancies. Like,
Yeah.
we don't,
Yeah.
like, everyone does what they
Yeah.
need
It
to
could
do.
be that there's somebody who, or a number of people who, like, they need everybody to know as soon as possible so that they have the support that they need, so that people know to, like, be considerate of them. So whatever it might be, like, that's okay. That's totally okay. You know what I'm saying? Like, whatever it is that you need. Like, I feel like I started off saying this, like, just set yourself up for success in that way. Set yourself up to have that support, whether it's from your spouse, from your siblings, from your community, from your friends. So if that means,
From a therapist. That was the
yes, oh
one
yes,
piece we
oh,
didn't talk about.
how did, that's the most important piece. If you made it to this point in the life, this is
Correct.
very, very rarely something that you're going to be able to navigate fully independently. I just, it's too much. It's too much for one
Yep.
person. And whether that's, like a therapist one-on-one, whether that's a support group, whether it has to be something. And I,
Medication, if you need
yeah,
it. I needed medication at different points
yeah,
in the
yeah,
pregnancy. Like,
yeah,
yes,
yeah.
yes, yes, and
And I
yes.
really, and this is kind of coming more even from my perspective as like a college teacher, someone who speaks to, married women a lot. I see sometimes a lot of women kind of putting the entire burden of their processing on their marriage. My husband is going to be the one who supports me. We'll navigate this together. And of course you will. And
And
and it's really a lot for one relationship to handle. It is. And I think that sometimes when we do that, like we set things up so that our husband is the one who is our sole source of support, that just puts a lot of strain on a relationship and a lot of strain on your marriage. And so I definitely recommend having support outside of your marriage as well, so that you're set up in a way that your husband can support you and you can support him.
correct,
Yeah.
correct. And I think that, even for the people, and I was one of those people who are like, what do I need therapy for? How's
Mm-hmm.
therapy going to help me? Therapy is not going to tell me that my babies are going to be alive. Like, so
Yeah.
therefore, like, what is therapy for? And
Mm-hmm.
so, like, I still, and I was a very, very huge skeptic that therapy would be helpful at all. And frankly, for me, it wasn't super helpful. Like, that
Yeah.
wasn't the thing, but
Mm-hmm.
it was still an appointment that I kept on a weekly basis, because I
Yeah.
knew that needed to be a space that
Yeah.
I could just dump and I didn't have to lay it all on my husband.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again, like, I just want to say this to be very, very clear. There are medications that are safe during pregnancy to be used. There are medications that you can take the entire pregnancy. There are medications, like for me specifically, I was able to manage, looking back, not so well, but manage. I was really able to manage the anxiety up until the second trimester. But once I hit those weeks where I had lost my babies previously, I basically couldn't get out of bed and I started having panic attacks.
Yeah.
And especially on the mornings when I had to go for those doctor appointments to
Ugh.
hear the heartbeat, I was having panic attacks. Both, like, I couldn't get out of bed, couldn't get myself in the car, in the waiting room. And so at that point I was seeing a psychiatrist.
I would be like the woman in the waiting room who was like all the way in the corner. Like, when I remember, like, you know, the medical assistant would come out and be like, is Samet here? And I'm like, I'm here.
I was in the waiting room. Yes, I was in the waiting room with earphones, with music blasting, like, and paying attention to nobody, just saying, like, just breathe, just breathe, just breathe, just breathe, just breathe, like the entire time. And I use short acting anti-anxiety medicines during those weeks in my second trimester. Because, like, I couldn't function otherwise. Like, totally couldn't function. And so please, if this is something that you can't handle on your own, if it's too big for you, if it's too much, please reach out, find people, reach out to your OB, your MFM. You can reach out to me. I have different contacts. I can give you people, psychiatrists who are trained specifically in this area. It is not a shame. It is not you are not less of a person for needing medicine or therapy during this experience.
Yeah. It's a really, really, really heavy thing. It's a heavy thing,
really,
you know? And so, you know, it's not a sign of weakness if you can't carry something that's heavier than your own self. Like, that's, you know, it's just a sign of how heavy this thing is. So yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. You know, what you said about therapy and that, like, being an appointment that you keep. So sometimes I like to say, like, sometimes therapy is like that closet where you dump everything, you know, like that room or that closet where you just dump everything. And it's like, and then sometimes therapy is like the cleaning out the closet, but it's consistently there for you. You know, it's consistently like, it's either way you go to dump or things out, or but it's really helpful to have that, and sometimes necessary to have that place. You know, every house needs a junk drawer.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. I mean, look, we're at the hour mark. Tell me, is there what else didn't we say that we wanted to say?
I think I said everything I wanted to say. And then some.
I
think we covered what we wanted to cover.
I think we did also. Look, the comments, thank you all so much for commenting so beautifully. And, like,
I've been so bad about
look, what I will say is that there were a couple of questions in here that weren't specifically relevant to pregnancy after loss. So
but I'm happy, Amy, if you want to put up like a question box or something, if people have follow-up questions, and we can, you know, like, maybe even in stories answer the ones that, you know, that are relevant.
Okay? Perfect. Okay. I think that's a great idea. And then I'll forward them to you afterwards.
Sure.
Please, anyone, if you have any other follow-up questions, anything that Shevi and I can help you with, please reach out to one of us. I will put up that question box in stories. And just know, like, I think the piece that I want to leave you with, that we both want to leave you with, is that this is really hard. Like, it's just really, really hard. And know that however you're navigating it, like, you're doing the best you can. And that there's no right way to do it, because it's just really hard.
Yeah. That's it. It's just that raw. Doesn't always tie up neatly in a bow.
Correct. Okay. And so here's our very unneat bow, and we'll continue the conversation.
Yes. Thank you
Okay.
so much, Amy, for having me and for
Thank
having this
you.
conversation with me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Look, this is we have to keep having these conversations because, you know,
Exactly.
now these people will see it, and then in another 6 months more people will need it. So we'll do it. We'll keep doing it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Okay. Amazing. Have a
All
great
right.
night. Thank you so
All
much,
right. Good night,
everybody.
everybody. Good
Take
night.
care.